Hello and welcome to Conspiracy. Today we'll be discussing the dangerous prisons Iceberg, from the minimum security Bastoy Prison in Norway to the no longer operational hell that was Unit 731 in Japan. Prisons all over the world have found ways to strike terror into the hearts of those who hear of them. Today's Iceberg comes to us courtesy of Reddit, so let me know if there are any prisons we missed that you would have included on this list, and the link to the iceberg can be found in the description. Thank you for watching, and let's get started. This iceberg video will be part 1 in a 3-part series. In the first video, we're going to be going over the first 3 layers, Bastoy Prison through Tent City. The second video will be the second 2 layers, and the last video will be the last 2 layers, ending with Unit 731. For anyone unfamiliar with how icebergs work, the list has the least dangerous prisons on top, working our way down to the most sickening later in the iceberg. With that noted, stick around to the end of the third video to find out why Unit 731 is considered one of the worst prisons of all time. The Bastoy Prison in Norway is a minimum security prison on Bastoy Island. Of the 60 employees at the prison, only 5 remain on the island overnight. The 115 inmate prison was once a prison colony for young boys and is now trying to become the first ecological prison in the world. Before the current prison was open, the island was a juvenile detention center, Bastoy Boys Home. The boys' home was taken over by the Norwegian government in 1953 and eventually shut down in 1970. In 1915, the boys rallied around 4 youth who had escaped and been recaptured, causing the May 20th Rebellion. Later dramatized in the 2010 film King of Devil's Island, Bastoy Island was once known for its brutal reformatory. However, today it is the site of the progressive Bastoy Prison. In the 38 years of operation, only 1 escape has been attempted, as the inmates know how easy they have it and fear the consequences of escaping. The consequences for attempted escape involves the inmate being transferred to one of the most strict prisons in Norway. Since this prison is focused on rehabilitation instead of punishment, the inmates and guards get along. The inmates live in cottages, have a prison chef, a sauna, tennis court, and horseback riding. While at most prisons, the inmates' days are dictated for them, told what to do from the moment they're woken up to the moment they go to bed, the inmates at Bastoy have to learn how to fill their own days, making some transitions from more standard prisons harder than expected. The Justice Center Leoben in Styria, Austria looks more like a modern library or office building than it does a prison holding 205 inmates. The prison is at capacity, with convicts including those who have been convicted of felonies. The prison was designed in 2004 and has started a debate on the treatment of prisoners and prisons of the future. Critics of the prison say that it's too lax on the criminals, as each criminal has a living space with their own kitchenette, abundant natural light, barred-off balconies, and a courtyard. The prison has often been compared to a 1-bedroom apartment, drawing critique from around the world. The Champ Dolan is located in Switzerland. Originally overcrowded, holding over 600 inmates in a building designed to house 200, this changed in 2011. $40 million was allocated to the prison, and again in 2020, when they dispersed prisoners for COVID. Prior to this, there were a number of prisoner riots, suicides, overdoses, and natural disasters. Addywell was designed as a learning prison in Addywell, Scotland, between Glasgow and Edinburgh. Addywell houses all types of offenders with the exception of females and young offenders. With the prison being a learning prison, the inmates address their offending behavior and the circumstances that led to their imprisonment. The prison offers 40 hours of what they call purposeful activity a week. Purposeful activity is divided into 3 main categories: learning skills, jobs, and programmed interventions. The prison also boasts a peer support model where inmates are identified for roles throughout the prison where they can act as a positive role model for the other inmates. Aranjuez, Ranwas, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this one, is often described as Spain's 5-star prison for families. Children ages 3 and younger can stay with their parents in one of the 36 family unit cells. The prison has cribs, Disney characters on the wall, and a prison playground for the kids just outside the prison walls. They allow the children to stay with their parents since they're too young to understand separation. While a lot of inmates are happy about the situation, they say it isn't the ideal place to raise a child. Doy. As in a number of ways, they are imprisoned as well. For a baby, this would be the only world they know, one of prison. Once a child reaches the age of 3, then they're taken and put with relatives, or social services if there's no family available. Because before 3, they don't know what separation is. After 3, kick them the heck out of there. The prison has sparked controversy throughout the world. Francis Cook, director of the Howard's League for Penal Reform, is on record as saying, quote, "It is not an advance. Prisons are the wrong place for children. There is a lot of evidence that show they will be affected in the long term. They don't see animals, they don't see trees, they don't have the stimulation that is needed to grow as a healthy child." San Quentin is referred to as the Arena by prisoners and is the oldest prison in California. San Quentin is home to the only death row for male inmates in the state of California and the largest in the United States. Every man who has ever been sentenced to death in California, with some minor exceptions, must be held at San Quentin. Death row is divided into 3 sections. The north section for prisoners who don't cause trouble, the east block, a crumbling, leaky maze of a place, built in 1927, and the adjustment center for, quote, the worst of the worst. As of 2015, death row had a capacity of 715 prisoners. It holds many notable prisoners, such as Iswaro Aguirre, who tortured and killed his girlfriend's 8-year-old son Gabriel, and was the subject of the Netflix series The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. Brandon Browner, former NFL player, Charles Manson, leader of the Manson family, Richard Ramirez, known as the serial killer The Night Stalker, and the actor Danny Trejo spent time here from 1965 to 1968 for stabbing a sailor in the face with broken glass. Offshore from San Francisco, California is the infamous Alcatraz Prison, located on Alcatraz Island. When the U.S. first got the island from Mexico following the Mexican-American War, President Millard Fillmore ordered that Alcatraz Island be used as a fort for the United States. Fort Alcatraz was used as the San Francisco arsenal for storage of firearms during the Civil War so they would not fall into the hands of Confederate sympathizers. Later on during the war, the island was used to house Confederate sympathizers and privateers along the West Coast. Alcatraz got its first official prison in 1867 when a brick jailhouse was built. Prior to this, prisoners were kept in the basement of the guardhouse. The next year, in 1868, Alcatraz was officially designated as a long-term detention facility for military prisoners. On October 2, 1993, the island barracks were taken over by the U.S. Department of Justice, and the island was officially designated as a federal prison 1 year later, in August of 1934. The first group of federal prisoners to enter the penitentiary arrived on August 11, 1934. The 137 prisoners were handcuffed in high-security locks and guarded by 60 specially selected FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and since they were arriving in San Francisco via train, railway security officers. The original 155 members of the staff were all highly trained in security, but not rehabilitation. This was due to the fact that Alcatraz was intended for prisoners who caused trouble at other federal prisons and was considered a last resort prison, holding the worst of the worst, with no hopes of rehabilitation. Alcatraz Prison quickly gained notoriety as the toughest prison in America, considered by many to be the worst prison of the time. Frank Murphy, U.S. Attorney General at the time, said, quote, "The whole institution is conducive to psychology that builds up a sinister, ambitious attitude among prisoners," end quote. While an author described it as, quote, "the great garbage can of the San Francisco Bay into which every federal prison dumped its most rotten apples," end quote. Kind of ironic considering San Francisco's as a whole is kind of the garbage can of San Francisco. There was a number of escape attempts from the island, a total of 14 to be exact. With a total of 36 prisoners, 23 were caught, 6 were shot and killed, 2 drowned, and 5 are listed as missing, presumed drowned. Of the most famous escape attempts, the June 1962 Alcatraz escape was this prison's most famous. 2 brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, and their pal Frank Morris attempted an escape off the island. Behind their cells was a 3-foot, unguarded utility corridor. The prisoners would chip away at the salt-damaged wall during music hour, with the sound of the accordions masking the chiseling. When it came time to escape, they placed papier-mâché dummies with human hair on their beds, entered the vent of the roof, and escaped to their inflatable raft made from over 50 raincoats they had stolen. While attempting to investigate the escape, the FBI closed their investigation, saying it was unlikely that they could have made the 1.25 mile journey to the shore with the strong currents and cold ocean temperatures. However, the U.S. Marshal case remains open and active. In the early 2010s, there was circumstantial evidence found that suggested that the men had survived. According to the FBI, their raft was never recovered and no cars were reported being stolen that night. However, a raft was discovered on the nearby Angel Island, and a 1955 blue Chevrolet had indeed been reported stolen by 3 men, the same night that the 3 men escaped. Relatives of the 2 Anglin brothers presented further evidence of the escape, saying they had fled to Brazil, and brought forward a picture from 1975 of 2 men that resembled John and Clarence. A facial recognition analyst concluded that it was, in fact, them. It is believed that the FBI was engaged in a cover-up of the escape, so trust in the FBI would not diminish. Ooh. Tell me the same FBI that did Waco doesn't want their reputation tarnished? The most famous prisoner to ever be held at Alcatraz was Al Capone, notorious bootlegger and gangster. If you were to go to Alcatraz Island today, as it is a national park and you can go visit it, you can see Al Capone's cell on display. Due to its rough past and the Native Americans of the region believing evil spirits dwelt there long before anything was built, it is considered to be a top 5 haunted location in California. The prison officially shut down on March 21st, 1963, and is now a popular tourist attraction. The Tombs is a nickname for the Manhattan dungeon complex. Looking at the history of the prison, it actually got the name The Tomb because the building complex was an Egyptian revival design inspired by an Egyptian tomb. After a few hours of research on the complex, I couldn't find anything else about it. I was doing research left and right. I was like, complex riots, complex, like, you know, the Tombs prison starvation, the Tombs prison riots. I couldn't find anything. If you can find anything, let me know. But I think it's on there because of the name and because it was designed after an Egyptian tomb. Gulags isn't the name of a specific prison. Gulags were a chain and network of forced labor camps in the Soviet Union. Originally set up by Vladimir Lenin, gulags didn't reach their peak until Joseph Stalin's rule in the 1930s to the early 1950s. Originally intended as prisons for the most serious of criminals and crimes, they quickly became sites for political enemies, people who spoke out against the state. Doctors, writers, students, artists, scientists, etc. were all sent to the gulags if they had any ties to or even spoke with anti-Stalinists. This wasn't just men, it was women and children as well. Many women faced the threat of assault and even forcible sexual assault. I have to replace the word with forcible sexual assault, but you know what I'm saying. It wasn't uncommon for people headed to the gulag to just be picked up off the street by the government security police with no trial and thrown onto a train. One of the worst tragedies to ever happen at a gulag is the Nazino tragedy. Roughly 6,700 prisoners were sent to Nazino Island in western Siberia in 1933. Their job was to construct a special settlement and work the land. They were sent with only flour for food, which they mostly ate on the journey to the island. They had little to no tools, and they were left without any additional clothing against the harsh Siberian weather. Any prisoner who tried to escape was shot and killed by the guards. The conditions broke down quickly and resulted in violence, disease, and cannibalism. In 13 weeks, over 4,000 of the 6,700 prisoners had died, and those who were still alive were severely ill. 2,856 prisoners were sent back to smaller, already established gulags, and 157 were left on the island as they were too poor health to be moved. The Nazino tragedy wasn't revealed or discovered until 1988, 55 years later. Geographics on YouTube actually has a great video on the Nazino tragedy. I would recommend you look it up. I've heard it said before that waterboarding at Guantanamo Bay sounds like a great time if you don't know what either of those things are. I have nowhere to go from that. Like, I don't have a good transition into Guantanamo Bay. I just really wanted to say it because I thought the joke was clever, and this is Guantanamo Bay. Seemed like a good place to put it. Guantanamo Bay is a prison that was opened in 2002 and is still operable today. The Geneva Convention lists torture as both a war crime and a crime against humanity, yet it is rumored to run rampant at Guantanamo Bay. Not only is it rumored to be happening, it was confirmed to be happening by FBI officials. An FBI agent was quoted as saying, quote, "On a couple of occasions, I entered interview rooms to find a detainee chained hand and foot in fetal position on the floor, with no chair, food, or water. Most times they had urinated or defecated on themselves and had been left there for 18, 24 hours or more." End quote. Air Force Lieutenant General Randall Schmidt concluded that a man was subject to, quote, "abusive and degrading treatment" by interrogation methods, the techniques of which were authorized by the Pentagon. Released prisoners tell of beatings, sleep deprivations, enemas, humiliation, and excessive time spent constrained in uncomfortable positions. Army Specialist Sean Baker was a soldier posing as a prisoner during training exercises at the camp. He was beaten so severely that he suffered a brain injury and seizures. There's a lot more to go into on Guantanamo Bay. I don't want to get this channel into the bad graces of YouTube on my first video, but please do some more research on this topic. Located in the Bronx of New York sits Rikers Island. Rikers Island has had to pay settlements many times, twice due to strip searches. In 1986, federal court ruled that strip searches could not be performed on people arrested on misdemeanor charges. However, Rikers was sued as recently as 2007 for strip searching misdemeanor detainees, paying a total of $83 million. In 2008, a correctional officer was indicted after he allegedly used a specially selected group of teens as enforcers, essentially using them as a way to control the other prisoners. In 2012, Captain Sherman Graham and Assistant Deputy Warden Gail Lewis were found guilty on all charges of covering up an assault on an inmate. In 2014, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York issued a report condemning the systematic and continuing abuse and violations of prisoners' constitutional rights. In spite of this and many other incidents of abuse, few officers have been prosecuted successfully or removed from their positions. Rikers Island is set to be closed by 2026. The maximum security prison found in Terre, Haute, Indiana is the holding unit for male federal inmates who have been sentenced to death and holds the federal execution chamber. There haven't been as many scandals or wrongdoings at this prison, and I actually believe that it's on this list as it houses the federal inmates that were sentenced to death, as well as the execution chamber. The Attica Correctional Facility in Attica, New York was originally opened in 1931 and has hosted a number of criminals during its time of operation. Attica is a maximum security prison and has only ever had one person escape. Joseph Mad Dog Sullivan was a mobster for the Genovese crime family of New York and is the only person to have ever escaped. One of the most prominent cases involving this prison is the inmates of Attica Correctional Facility versus Rockefeller. The case affirmed the rights of state prosecutors to choose whether to investigate and prosecute individuals that had potentially committed a crime. There was one rebellion which took place in 1971, where inmates took control of the prison for several days, seeking to negotiate the improvement of conditions and treatment of the overcrowded prison. 43 people were killed during the standoff. 9 hostages and 30 prisoners were killed by law enforcement gunfire. 1 guard died of injuries sustained on the first day of the rebellion, and 3 prisoners were killed by other prisoners. La Fontaine Prison, found in the Montparnasse district of France, is one of the most infamous prisons in the country, having both a high security wing as well as a VIP wing. During the Nazi occupation of France, 18 resistance fighters were executed. 9 were killed by guillotine, and the other 9 were shot. In 2000, the head doctor of the prison published a book denouncing the very poor prison conditions. Most famously, the prison has held the military dictator of Panama and Jean-Luc Brunel, the former head of a French model agency who was accused of supplying young girls to the person who did not kill himself, Jeffrey Epstein, and was also, oddly enough, found hanged in his cell. Opened in 1880, Folsom is California's second oldest prison, only being surpassed by San Quentin, listed earlier on this list. Folsom was one of the first ever maximum security prisons and is the execution site of 93 prisoners. The most notable people housed here were also some of the most notable people housed in San Quentin: Danny Trejo and Charles Manson. In the 1970s and 80s, violence at the prison peaked. The Mexican Mafia, the Black Guerrilla family, and other prison gangs made prisons increasingly dangerous, leading to the establishment of secure housing units. Johnny Cash actually put on 2 live shows at this prison. They were recorded and released as his live album entitled At Folsom Prison. Very accurate name. He had actually written and recorded the song Folsom Prison Blues more than a decade before he visited. In the heart of Vladimir, Russia, is the country's largest prison. First opened in 1783, the prison hosts inmates serving a minimum of 10 years. It was made to hold all political prisoners, but eventually became part of the Gulag system in the USSR. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the prison was reverted to a regular detention facility. There was a museum about the prison opened on the prison grounds in 1996. While it's currently the largest prison in Russia by capacity, it is set to be surpassed by a prison called Kretzy II in St. Petersburg. Guantanamo Prison is infamous for the Guantanamo Prison scandal. The Georgian prison had many videos leaked, showing prison guards and their commanding officers torturing, taunting, and sexually abusing prisoners. Once the videos were released, there were many protests in the country, and the chairman of the penitentiary department was fired. And, after firing the chairman, the Minister of Corrections herself resigned. The videos were released by a former prison officer who fled to Belgium and was wanted in connection to the abuse. Eventually, the prosecution decided to drop the charges as a result of a plea bargain, as he had helped to uncover, quote, systematic crimes in the Georgian penitentiary. The videos range from verbal and physical abuse to youth inmates being forced to insult thieves under the threat of being forced into sexual intercourse if they did not comply. Known as Arizona's concentration camp, Tent City was supposed to be a temporary overflow area for Arizona's overcrowded prison population. Tent City is set in the scorching Phoenix heat, with essentially just tent shade to keep the heat out. The prison was first built in 1993 and wasn't closed until 2017, despite it supposing to be a temporary solution that was supposed to last a few years maximum. Inmates were forced into chain gangs, which were widely abandoned across the US in 1955. Detention officers didn't want to work in Tent City because of the dangerous conditions. There weren't a lot of officers there, so if there was a riot, there wasn't a lot of backup. During one protest in 1996, prisoners even burned down some of the tents. The prison was known to hold a lot of undocumented immigrants, and was also known as a holding center for prisoners that needed to be transferred elsewhere. This is video 1 of my 3-part series on the most dangerous prisons, Iceberg. This is tiers 1 through 3. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I hope if any of them caught your interest that you will do some more research into them. I highly recommend some research into Guantanamo Bay and gulags. And like I said, Geographics on YouTube has a great video on the Nazino tragedy. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit subscribe if you would like. Hit that like button if you liked it. And I'll see you guys in part 2. But before part 2 comes out, I actually have a video on the Salem witch trials coming out, so be on the lookout for that.